Wake that ass up.
Early in the morning.
The Breakfast Club.
Morning, everybody. It's DJ Envy, Angela Yee, Charlamagne the Guy. We are the Breakfast Club. We got a special guest on the line right now, or on the Zoom. We have John Stewart. Welcome.
Welcome. Hey, what's up, guys? Thanks for having me.
What's happening? Hey, thank you for
It's
coming.
going good.
First of all, I really enjoyed Irresistible, man. Really enjoyed
Oh,
it.
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Well, Steve Carell's one of my favorites. Once I saw Steve Carell starring in it, and also Rose Byrne, so I love the two of them. So once I saw that, I was like, this is going to be amazing.
Oh, thank you for taking the time to watch it. And yeah, once I got Carell involved, everything else kind of flowed pretty smoothly. I wrote it with him in mind and just kind of sent it to him, hoping that he would take to it. So I got fortunate with that.
Now, break down what Irresistible is about.
How?
Break it down for people that haven't. I know Charlamagne's seen it, Yee's seen it, I've seen it. But for people who haven't seen it, break it down a little bit.
It's not out yet.
I know, but break it down so people will see it.
It's about a young boy who's left alone over Christmas by his family. They go to...
Thank you, John.
That would be Home Alone. That would be Home Alone.
But he ends up having to defeat burglars and eat a pizza. It's really,
But how did Irresistible title come from that?
It's new. It's a new title. Same movie. It's really about, the thing I'll say is, because I don't want to give too much away, but it's a movie about the current political system and the gravitational pull that it exerts and how far away it's drifted from the problems and the facts on the ground of the real people that it's purporting to serve. And hopefully it's funny and people have a good time watching.
Absolutely.
Right out of the gate, not to give too much away, but these political strategists, they admit they're lying to us, yet the American public still listens. Why? I feel like we do this. We know this with politicians, the political strategists, the media. We know they're lying, but we still listen. Why?
Man, I just think that's a great question, because I think ultimately what they've learned is noise is an effective strategy to blunt any change of the status quo. And one of the best kind of noisemakers is to flood the zone with non-facts and lies and spin to make it much more difficult for people to be able to discern what's real and what's not. Because here's the other thing, we're busy and they count on that. It's sort of like, you ever look at your credit card statement and they send you that pamphlet that explains to you like the rules, and it's impenetrable. You cannot figure out what it is they're trying to tell you about your credit card rate or when you have to pay. And it's done on purpose. They don't want you to know the ins and outs. They don't, because that means you'll hold them accountable. So they spread the field with manure, and then you don't want to walk on it. I mean, that's my sense of the why that they do. And also, they benefit from it. If you look at the 24-hour news cycle, right? It needs content. And so they create this cast of characters that they just roll through, and there's no accountability. You can lie. It's like a game of musical chairs. But when the music stops, nobody ever removes the chair. Right. So there's no accountability for terrible punditry or being wrong about who's going to win or who's not going to win, or terrible policy. And so the whole system is designed to blunt accountability. You see it even now. What did Trump just do? They fired the lead prosecutor of the Southern District of New York because they can. And that's an effort to blunt accountability. And the whole system functions that way.
Wow.
You know, one thing I also
I guess this is pretty dark for early in the morning. I don't mean it like that.
Oh, that wasn't, it's not dark at all. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah. One thing I realized, and of course I think we realized this with the election of the president, but also with smaller elections, that pretty much anyone can run for office, right? And that is true. Like I remember having this discussion where we do need, younger people we feel like in office and more people that represent us to run for office. But at the same time, anybody could run for office on anything and potentially win. There's times that people run for office and there's no one even running against them, right? And then they win just by default. So have you seen, besides the obvious, have you seen a lot of that in politics, just people that are so unqualified running for a position and they end up in office?
I think we see it at some of the highest positions in the land.
Right, besides the obvious.
I think the evidence seems to be growing that the head of the whole operation doesn't know what he's doing. But Angela, I think the flip side of that is what gives me hope and optimism, because what I feel like has begun to occur is that conditions have become so untenable that grassroots, people who might not normally engage in the system in that way, are starting to stand up and say, I am going to hold them accountable and I am going to stand up and take on this task myself. And you see it bubbling up. And I think it's always a pendulum swing, but in this darker moment, the light is all these really smart, active, engaged young people starting to stand up and take control of the situation.
It's a very
in a way, it's
powerful,
like if you don't have a background in politics, in a way, with everything that's going on, is actually, I think, kind of beneficial for some things.
Because I sort of look at it like politics right now is played on a field that's a Superfund site. And until we clean up the toxicity of the Superfund site, we're not going to get better outcomes. So for me, I always feel like it's a structural and systemic issue more than it is individuals. And I feel like these young individuals and other people getting involved will help clean the building. The building's been condemned to some extent, and we've got to rebuild it.
There's a scene in the movie when, I'm not going to give it away, but Colonel Jack is basically saying that money is the problem in regards to politics. How can that system ever be dismantled?
So I think that's what we've tried. There was McCain-Feingold and campaign finance reform, but I think it's always nibbling at maybe the edge of it. Because when you have money in a system, I think we all know that system is going to protect itself. Systems don't generally dismantle their own profit. Mm-hmm. They tend to entrench. And so what happens is elections now become permanent. If there's a ton of money in this industry, right? So let's look at it like football. What is football always trying to do? The owners, they're always going, hey man, what about 17 games? What about 18? How about we make the playoffs? Why don't we make it 20 people? And the players are saying, that would be great, but this injures my brain. So I would like to keep it around like maybe 16, maybe 4, maybe we don't go so hard in training camp. And the owners just keep saying, I'd really like to get a little more out of this. Politics is once money starts flowing, everybody wants to figure out, how do we keep this thing going? How do we keep this carousel? How do we keep this swirl growing the pot? Mm-hmm. And so you got billions and billions of dollars flowing into this thing, and everybody in that system is getting a taste. And they're not about to say, you know what, let's just have elections 3 months every 4 years. We'll and we won't deal with it except for that. So it's a permanent campaign. But they announced the other day, Joe Biden raised $80 million. I think Trump raised $78 million in a month. Mind-boggling. And that's not even the half of the kind of money that's flowing through this thing. Bloomberg spent $1 billion to get to stand in front of a podium twice.
Damn.
Maybe he was standing there before and he's too short, we couldn't see him. But the truth is, he spent $1 billion to stand on a podium twice on a debate stage.
Two guys that people
That's
don't
a
even
corrupt
like
system.
raised $150 million. That should be a crime.
Right. And by the way, that's the least of the money. That's the least of the money. The real money is the dark money that's flowing in from corporations and billionaires to influence that system of legislation and everything else. And the contracts that are then being handed out. That $2 billion in arms or $3 billion in arms to Saudi Arabia, that came from somewhere. Right. Things don't just happen by themselves.
Right.
That's why I love that twist you did in the movie, man. I love what you did. I'm definitely not giving that away, but
yeah,
listen,
you can't. You
also
better
in
not.
the movie, yeah. Also in the movie, you show how Democrats don't know how to talk to regular everyday people. Why can't Democrats get their messaging right? Like,
because I think so. The Republican Party has an advantage in that they're more homogenous. They're just talking to one group. It's like anything else. When you go to a show, right? You go to a country show and it's going to be a country act. Right. And you're going to feel that rhythm and you're going to feel that vibe and you're going to understand where they're coming from. Any genre is like that. The Republican Party is basically a single genre party. The Democratic Party is really a coalition of interests, and you'll see it no matter where you go. You've got people, you've got DACA standing next to BLM, standing next to Free Palestine, standing next to Pussy Hats, standing next to, standing next to Five Guys going legalize pot. Like, it's a mishmash. Mm-hmm. And so there is no real singular common language for the Democratic Party to speak to each other.
Interesting.
And certainly not to reach across and speak to, a Republican Party that's become really entrenched in that identity.
Right.
And I just think it makes it much more difficult to hold that sort of, it's almost like the Republicans are one party and the Democrats are a parliamentary system filled with different interests and parties.
Yeah, Republicans will go for their candidate no matter what, whether they agree with them, disagree with them. Mm-hmm. And I feel like with Democrats, we do such a great job of being really divided amongst each other that we kind of like tear each other down so much that by the time it's time for an election, and we've seen that happen, obviously with Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. Mm-hmm. Yeah, by the time it's time to go vote, it's like, well, I'm a Bernie supporter, but now I can't support Hillary. And I think with the Republicans, whoever their candidate is, it doesn't matter. They are behind them 100%.
And they'll switch what they think depending on what their leader tells them. There's no principle behind it anymore. Right. If you look at the criticisms that were leveled at Barack Obama by the Republicans for 8 years, well, Donald Trump, by almost every metric, has performed worse according to their own criticisms. I'm talking about, on almost every metric that they criticize him on, down to like how many times he played golf. Right. But all of a sudden they've decided, when Obama played golf, this guy's not even working, he's not paying attention. When Trump plays golf, mm-hmm. Guy's got to exercise, doesn't he? If Obama talked about himself, this egocentric, I can't believe this. Trump talks about himself, he's got confidence. I like this gentleman. Tells it like it is. So what they do is they change the metric. There is no principle but power. And that is how they're able to challenge, what's the big challenge now? They say political correctness. Look, if you're more concerned in this day and age about language policing than policing, you're out of step. But what's their big complaint right now? Statues and cancel culture.
Right.
But that's all distractions, though. They don't really care about that shit. I think they're just doing that to make us not focus on the things that they're actually doing to harm America.
That's the point, Charlamagne. The point is there is no principle but power. So what they told you they believed in 8 years ago, they've shown you they don't believe in now. It's all to hold on.
Well, what do you anticipate happening in November?
Man, I don't pray a lot. I try not to speculate on anything. People 4 years ago, people would say to me, "Can Donald Trump really win?" And the only thing I could say is, yeah, because he's done the one thing you need to do to get to be president, and that is win the nomination.
Right.
So that's all, whatever happens. I would say the focus for the left should simply be protecting the vote. Protect the vote. That's going to be the key. You're going to see 4 voting booths for 800,000 people. Like, protect the ability to vote.
They couldn't do that in 2016 though. Like, they can't get an election security bill passed because of Mitch McConnell. We know it's voter suppression, not to mention voter depression, just because people aren't enthused by Joe Biden. It's like, it's going to be bad.
So the thing that I think we've got, the hardest thing for someone like in your position to do is maintain your optimism and enthusiasm, because they're trying to wear you down. Look, what are they working on their side? It's all about fear and the slippery slope, right? If they take down the Robert E. Lee statue, well, what's next? If they complain about, if they call me racist, what's next? The mob is coming for you. So they're lighting up their base on fear and the slippery slope, right? But if you were to play out their slippery slope to the worst it could possibly be, if BLM is successful, the mob is going to come after you, and what might happen? You feel like maybe you'll start getting followed in stores, or they'll make it harder for you to buy a house. So their slippery slope argument, in its worst case scenario, isn't as bad as the lives people are living right now. And their whole pitch is their dystopian future and fear of it won't allow us to deal with the dystopian present that so many people are living in. And I really feel like we can't fall prey to that. Right. And there has to be a feeling of, you guys are drivers of enthusiasm and interest. Keep deconstructing the nonsense. Keep on top of it. Don't let, Angela, you said it best. Democrats are really good at finding fault in themselves. Don't let our faults, which will always be there, stop us from making the changes to progress that we can make. If that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense, because we cannibalize ourselves a lot. But what the problem I have sometimes with Democrats is they'll say we need the largest voter turnout in U.S. history to win this November, but we can't tell people all the things they are up against because they may not come out in November. And in the movie, Colonel Jack has a line where he says you can't win a battle if you're not honest about what you're up against. If Dems told the American people the truth, we may be energized to come out in November. Let people know, yes, there was Russian interference. Yes, there's voter suppression. Yes, there's voter depression. People, they're going to try to steal this election from you, but we need y'all to come out in droves in order to beat that. Tell the truth.
Completely agree. And part of what I was trying to show in the movie is that, again, there's rot in the infrastructure of those systems. Consultants and you'll see, here's what's going to happen. You're going to see, Joe Biden have to go out and talk to YouTube influencers, and he's going to do it without wearing a tie, because young people, if you're wearing a tie, they don't know what's going. Be your authentic self. It's the one thing. What I really, for Joe Biden, I don't like the Uncle Joe character, Uncle Joey, that fast talking, you know, touchy-feely. I'm Uncle Joey, like the salesman character. But I don't think that's what he has to offer America in this moment. And I actually think he does have something to offer America in this moment. This is not just about, for me, look, Biden wasn't my guy, perfectly honest. I was much more in the Biden-Warren camp, Sanders-Warren camp. But he's my guy now.
Right.
That's the horse that's running, and I'm going to run with it. Because I do think it's not just about anybody but Trump. In this moment, we are a nation in anguish and anger and fear. And here's my hope about Biden. This is a man who knows loss. This man has felt loss. He has suffered. His wife, a young child, his son. My hope is that loss has humbled him to the idea of what it feels like to be an anguished people. And if he is, if that, I feel like we need a leader in this moment of humility, who is looking to understand their own ignorance and blind spots and do better and be humble enough to know what they don't know and to be humbled enough by grief to know the pain that people carry with them every day, because we don't have that. We are leaderless. Yeah. And so that is my positive case, affirmative case for a leader in this moment. Humility, grace. We need it. We don't need a guy holding up a Bible while, tear gassing protesters to get there. My favorite thing, Trump's holding up the Bible with that look on his face, like he looked like a teacher, like, who wrote this? When I find out who wrote this, like he was like mad. Who wrote this? Nobody's leaving until I find out.
Now, with you being from New York, what do you think about defunding the police? We hear New York has a budget of $6 billion yearly, and everybody's talking defund the police. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are, look, tip of the iceberg. And again, it's about, I have a very different relationship, obviously, with the police, right? White guy. I worked with them on the Droga Act, 9/11 stuff. So my feeling about the individuals within that organization is very different than the people who might feel and have experienced other things in front of that. So I have to try and be open and understand my experience is not the experience, if that makes sense.
Right.
Second thing is, my feeling is we use the police at times as a proxy. We have put them, and teachers as well, in an untenable position, covering for the segregationist policies that have existed in this country. So we use them to keep Black people and poor people, we use them as kind of a border patrol, right? So it's not just about the police, it's about the structure underneath it. Now, certainly it's very clear things have to change structurally within that organization and their relationship to the Black community. But we also have to change the Black community's relationship. It's such a, I hate to even, I'd like to know what, look, I'm just an old man spouting opinions, and I'd be very interested to hear what you guys think of this. But to me, this goes back to a much deeper issue. And I would really like your thoughts on this. I think one of the biggest problems we face right now is that there is a large swath of the white population that believes Black people are responsible for not being able to get out of the hole we put them in.
Yes, sir.
But without acknowledging that that hole was structural and was never filled in. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It makes perfect
Yeah.
sense. You know, I say it all of the time. Like, you know, we act like this whole mechanism of white supremacy, or we act like racism isn't systemic. It was things that were systemically done to Black people, legislation that was created to put Black people in a certain position. So now we have to systemically get Black people out. It has to be legislation created to help Black people get out. Like, you telling us to pull ourselves up by the bootstraps, but you cut our goddamn feet off. Why would I have boots if I don't even got no feet?
Yeah, we're still trying to play catch up from, generations of us not having and being repressed and having things taken away from us and not having access. So while people might be starting way ahead of us, and we're back here trying to catch up as we move forward.
And part of it, I think, is because at the get-go, equality was something that had to be granted by the ruling class. Like, Declaration of Independence is pretty clear.
Yeah.
All men are created equal and endowed with inalienable rights by their creator. But apparently, there was a bouncer at that club who was very discerning about who they would let into the equality.
Exactly.
And for me,
But you know,
Even with that, when it
Yeah,
says
but-
all men, slave masters wrote it. So in the Constitution, it says we were 3/5 of a human being. So they never quite looked at us as humans, as men
Right.
or women. So you can't. When they were saying men, they weren't thinking about us.
and by the way, the 3/5 compromise was put in by the North because the South wanted to count Black people as one person with no rights. It was all about apportionment of representation. So the South, what you learn about the founding of the country is it was more important for them to form the Union than to live up to the principles that created the reason for the Union. And look, man, that 3/5 thing is a great, let's just look at it mathematically, right? All men are created equal. 1 equals 1.
Right.
10 years later, it's 3/5 equals 1. So now Black people over the next 200 years are fighting for that 40%. And the powers that be, the ruling class, is going, here's 3%. We good? It's 2%. Here's 5 points on your college application. Oh, you know what? We'll do, it's structural and systemic. I hate to go back to football again, but I don't know if you guys saw Vic Fangio, he's the coach of the Denver Broncos, right? So he comes out and he says, football is great because it's a meritocracy. There's no systemic racism in football. He's talking about the players.
yeah, right.
I look out on that field and it's a meritocracy. It's whoever's the best player, gets in position. And I wanted to say, you might want to turn around and look behind you.
Look at the owners.
Because every owner, there's not one.
Right.
And in the coaching ranks, because that's not a meritocracy, because I think Black people have had to fight so hard for equality while white people were building equity.
Mhm.
Absolutely, 100%. That's exactly what it is. Like that's not something to think about. That's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And the time now is then, so to address that issue, I think, again, so when we say like defund the police and all that, like, great, or whatever that means in terms of reform. Listen, I'm a believer also in, the police. My experience, I used to do a joke about it. This is 1993, 94, 93. It was after I was at a protest for Rodney King. So this shit's been obviously going on a very, very long time. But I remember this sums up my complicated relationship. Being in the street and marching and everybody shouting, fuck the police, fuck the police. And then it got dark and people started turning over cars and lighting fires. And I was like, where the fuck are the police? You see what I'm saying? Like, It's complicated.
Listen, you told Rolling Stone magazine that you believe the issue with situations like George Floyd's death is that we're addressing the wrong problem. Is that what you mean? Is that we should be addressing white supremacy and systemic racism? Is that what you meant?
We should be addressing equity.
Okay.
We had opportunities in this country to address equity, and we never did it. In fact, we went the opposite way. In the Great Depression, we formed the Federal Housing Administration, and it specifically wrote into federal guidelines for housing that Black people couldn't get loans to buy their houses. The wealth of this country has been built on equity, right? After World War II, GIs came back together. And when it was found that the Federal Housing Administration was unconstitutional, they wrote covenants into deeds. So Levittown in Long Island got built with money from the government for GIs that would get low-cost loans, and those people got to build equity. But Black soldiers who had just as good a job or just as good a credentials could not get loans. And then there was redlining, and then there were zoning changes. This is not happenstance. And you can't build a ghetto and then suddenly decide, okay, that's not here anymore, but we are going to police the edge of it, and we're never going to tear it down. Because when you quarantine people, you cut off the economic tributaries that exist to feed that area.
That's right.
So my opinion is what you have to do to face this, and maybe this plays into what reparations could be, which is call it Project Equity, a Marshall Plan to build Black ownership, because you can't negotiate equality from a subservient position. So our generational challenge is to help build Black equity. Have you guys, what do you think of when I was in Atlanta for a couple of months, I was struck by the economic diversity that Black people had there. I know there's problems there.
Black excellence.
But there was something there that felt different. It felt like Black people's presence.
They have a Black working class.
Right. And so their presence wasn't policed. Ahmaud Arbery was killed jogging. That dude, they always say, like, for Black people, if you would just behave better, act a little whiter, change, make your names like Doug and Kevin, and pull your pants up, you'd be fine. That dude was called in, the police were called on him in the park, right? He was bird watching.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think there's a whiter thing you can do.
Right.
Yeah, I was talking to DL Hughley, and DL Hughley said to me, a Black man bird watching is kind of suspicious, if I'm being
Shut up, man. Now I know you have to go, so I want to ask you, you were supposed to do a theatrical release, but now you're doing digitally. Let's talk about that a little bit, because I'm sure that changed your plans majorly.
I mean, it changed the company's plans. It doesn't really change mine. What changed mine is more the pandemic. Normally, I'd be able to sit with people, which I prefer. That this is distant, so it's hard. But I'm just happy to get it out there and hope. I was saying to somebody, it's like showing up at a plane crash with a bar of chocolate. Like, world's on fire. There's all this terrible stuff, going on, and I'm just out there like, chocolate. So, but I'm happy that it'll get out there. I'm happy for people to see it. I really do hope that it gives a moment's pause to think about the system that we've devised, about how we elect people, and what's their relationship to the real problems on the ground.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, it's great timing.
I think that, art does play a role in the public's understanding of politics, whether it's film, whether it's stand-up, whether it's music. Like, what role do you think this film plays in the public's understanding of politics?
I hope that it, we're all watching the weather, right? The weather is what's happening outside your window on a day-to-day basis. And you might look at it and be like, wow, it's been stormy lately. And I'm hoping maybe this movie is just a little glimpse of the climate. of an ability to step back and go, what's the system that keeps generating such bad weather? And maybe try and look at things. I think for me, that's always what I've tried to do is maybe deconstruct how systems are incentivized or what are the larger forces at play that are causing the conditions, maybe on the ground. I mean, the truth is, look, it's just a movie. Like it's hopefully funny. It's kind of a trifle. If it gives people a moment of, oh yeah, why do we accept the system in its current state of corruption? And that goes for all. And I know I have to go, but I actually don't. If you'll have me, I can stay for a couple more minutes. I don't really have another thing.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah, let's talk. Come on.
They were telling us, wrap it up. He has to go, but please.
Yeah. No, I'm okay. But I felt like I was dominating the conversation before, and I think we were onto something that felt more interesting. And I just want to hear from you guys what you think are the remedies beyond police and things like that. And
the only way. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, and how you feel about it.
No, the only way America can atone for its original sin, which is slavery, is through legislation and, most importantly, reparations. So I totally agree with you. There has to be some type of economic equity package that is, presented to the Black community. Like it's really just that simple.
Yeah, I think education is really important, making sure for our kids that they have something to do when they're not in school, but making sure that it's equal. Like, just some people don't want to send their kids to school in certain districts, and the school system is not good there. They don't have the right books, the right tools, the right teachers even. So I think it really does start there. It starts with people feeling more comfortable, like knowing that I have a home that I live in. I don't have to go out and commit crime because times are so hard and so difficult. We have to make sure that we fix up neighborhoods that people live in and that they have access to things that people in other neighborhoods have access to. I think a lot of those things really matter. And I do believe also when things happen, like if there is a domestic dispute, that I agree that police shouldn't be called into a situation like that. I do think that's something that a mediator or someone that is specialized to deal with something like that. And I know we've said that also about people who suffer from mental health issues, addiction issues, things like that. I think certain cases we don't need somebody with a gun to show up that may not necessarily know how to de-escalate or handle that situation. So I think there's a lot of things that are necessary, and there's a lot of things that we need in order for us to start achieving some of that equity, like you said.
I think what she said is the most important is knowledge, right? You look at, for myself, I'm the first person in my family to graduate from college, the first person in my family to be an entrepreneur, not because my parents didn't, it's because they didn't know how to. My dad doesn't know anything about the stock market. He doesn't know anything about investing his money because he was never taught. I think our community, we need to learn how a lot of that stuff. When you talk about, we're trying to get equality and most white people have equity, we're just trying to figure out how to get equity. We still have to face the fact that the banks won't lend us money. We still have to face the fact that, they push us out our communities, buy our communities, then put our communities back together and then charge us 3 times the rent. We've seen it in Brooklyn and Harlem and Jersey City and Hoboken and all these areas. So we need that knowledge. And second of all, I think we also need our community to be policed by officers in that community. I have the same kind of relationship as you with the police officers. My dad is a retired police officer. So I look at police on 2 different sides. I've been pulled over 1,000,001 times, but also my dad was a police officer. So one thing about my dad being a cop, I talk about it all the time, is even though he was a police officer in the Bronx, we lived in Queens, everybody in the neighborhood knew he was a police officer. So that was his block. If there was a problem, they called him. If there was a situation on the block, they reached out to him first because he was able to call Eric's mom. He was able to call, this person's dad first and figure it out here without getting violent, without going to, a possibility with, like, you look at certain instances where somebody gets arrested, they have a record. With that record, they can't do a lot of jobs because of a stupid mistake they made at the age of 16, the age of 17, where a lot of times other communities get that pass. We don't get that pass. And that's what I think we need to do. We need police officers in our own community, and we need the knowledge. We need to make sure that we can get the knowledge. And it's not going to start with us when we finally get somebody that does make it, and you tax them half their money, and they can't leave it to their kids, they can't leave it to their next generation, they can't leave it to the people that surround them, because we getting taxed just as much as somebody that has generational wealth for years and years and years and years and years. That's hard.
Yeah. And with the cops, even it has to affect them. Like when they do things continually wrong, 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 I think there has to be some accountability. And that could come, in the form of, I've heard people talk about having it affect their pension, having it affect them financially. And if it's something serious, they should definitely be fired. It shouldn't be a question.
John, America still has to give us what they owe. Call your white friends and tell them that reparations is owed to the Black community.
And how would you like to see that? How would you like to see that? Who do we make the check out to, first of all? And how would you like to see that done? Because that's really, so here's part of the issue, right? You've got to sell that to the white community and to the community at large, who are going to say, so you got two problems. One, a large portion of white people who think Black people are responsible for that, that poverty and crime is of poor virtue and culture. By the way, wouldn't talk about white poverty that way. If you listen to them talk about the Rust Belt poverty, the factory worker, they're victims of circumstance. The jobs left, those poor people. Black people, come on, suck it up. So that's one perception that has to be changed. The second is resource guarding. So another large portion might think, well, my life's not that easy, and why do I always have to give up my resources to go to people when I didn't do anything wrong? I haven't done anything wrong. So how do we, if we're gonna have the honest conversation, I believe those two issues have to be addressed. You have to talk about how do we engage. And that's why I think, it's so complicated. But like Brown versus Board of Education, separate but equal was found unconstitutional. And so they broke down segregation. And you saw when you just brought children into a white neighborhood to go to school, people went nuts. We've all seen those pictures. And you can say to yourself, oh, it's the 1950s. People didn't know, they're ignorant, racist. Well, in the 1970s in busing, when they tried to bus children again into white neighborhood, and you look at those pictures, it's like, are they time travelers?
Right.
That same face, hate and fear. So what is that? What is that from? It's feeling like my life isn't so easy, and they're going to take my resources and they're going to give it to people that I've never done anything to. So how do we bridge that gap? And I really feel like this is the generational issue of our lives. And I think the answer is, look, we're stuck in this fucking trickle down theory of economics where $1.5 trillion tax cuts go to people at the top. And we've tried it since the 80s and it doesn't work. The job generationally for us is a Marshall Plan at that scale of building infrastructure, of creating. You will change welfare and food stamps by bringing money back to the dignity of work, taking it away from the investor class. The pendulum has swung too far. Let's make sure that, and I think that Black people have to be in charge of their rebuilding effort. It can't be the white people in the government step out and say, okay, here, we're going to give you an opportunity zone. This isn't about an opportunity zone. This is about Black people building equity for themselves and for each other, and being funded by an infrastructure investment. And also saying,
hundreds of,
yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just saying you could take hundreds of billions of dollars in funding and technical support and turn around, 100 of the country's most disadvantaged communities. Like you can focus on, disparities in early childhood schools, higher education, skills and training, employment, health and environmental conditions. Like you could literally turn the hood around tomorrow.
And ownership. And then what I would say is to make sure that in those infrastructure investments, that middle-class white people are also reassured that that these reparations aren't being taken from you, that it's an investment in rising up and creating a much stronger middle class throughout the country, but also making sure that they're reassured that resources will also be available for them. I don't think we can do it any other way. I think it would create too big a schism and too big a resentment, and I don't think it would work. But I think that a large part, it has to go into, like you say, those 100 most disadvantaged communities and start building that equity.
Right.
Because you can't negotiate equality without equity.
Right. I agree with you.
But it seems so crazy when there's problems, right? And they say, okay, well, we're going to cut $1 trillion check to bring the economy back. And then we look at all our communities and say, damn, you could have cut these checks for our communities years ago if it was that easy to make the money.
That's right.
Hey, man, what, $3 trillion, $4 trillion in this pandemic, and we don't even know where it went.
Right.
They won't even tell us. What I would have done in this, as soon as that pandemic hit and people got locked in, suspend and extend all rents and mortgages. Do it from the demand side. Do it from the side of the people on the ground. I'm tired of us funding the investor class. And now I'm part of it, and I still think it's wrong.
Right.
You know what else you could do? You can increase access to capital, both debt and equity, by supporting Black-owned banks. You know, because those Black-owned banks are going to make sure that people get money for entrepreneurs or
schools,
homeowners,
education, homeowners, all that. Mm-hmm.
And I definitely feel like the marijuana business has to come back into the community, since so many people were sent to jail for marijuana convictions and lost so much. I think all the money they're making from marijuana, and they're going to make a percentage of that, has to go towards these programs as well.
And that's another great point, Angela, because that stain on a person's record. Look, man, I truly believe if I were Black, I'd be in jail. Because when I was growing up, I pulled some shit. But I was given a pass.
You was a scammer?
I would have gone. What is that?
You was a scammer or a drug dealer? What'd you do?
It was drugs and alcohol and shenanigans, vandalism. That's what we did. We were bored, and that's what we did. And we would have gone to jail, and we didn't. Mm-hmm. And that mark immediately sets you back. If you're trying to tell me that Black kids in this country do more drugs than white kids,
Nope.
Bullshit. Bullshit.
I learned about drugs from going to private school. I didn't even know anything about it before that when I was in public school.
But white kids don't go to jail for it because it's just a part of being a kid, right? So we've criminalized being a teenager. And once you do that, the kid that hopped a turnstile and got sent to Rikers Island and was there for months and ended up killing himself.
Right.
That doesn't happen. So I think my point is so let's say we did do something like that, play it out. Who runs it? Somebody like Obama? Somebody like you need a point person of great trust and integrity.
Yeah.
Robert Smith. Yeah, Robert Smith. Richest African-American in America.
And he just did didn't he just do a huge donation to, I think, HBCU no, he paid for everybody's tuition.
Paid for everybody's, in 2019 in Morehouse. Yep. Everybody graduated, paid their tuition.
Why not start making this a concrete proposition and start putting names and numbers and things to it? Right. And realize it in a way that we haven't been able to do before.
Right.
That's interesting that you say that, because you got legislation passed and you got people paid with the 9/11 bill for first responders. How difficult was that?
Incredibly difficult. And the strangest thing was, it was most difficult to convince those that supposedly represent patriotism in this country the most. It was Republican leaders who never fail on 9/11 to tweet out, "Don't forget our heroes." But when you go to their office and go, "Hey man, I'm here with the heroes, and 3 of them have stage 4 cancer, and this guy's on an oxygen machine. So what about that?" That's a New York problem. Well, you can't really prove that it came from there. So the government is set up to deny, to continue the status quo so that the money flows to the people that they believe help entrench them in their positions. And that's where it has to change, because the cause of it was obvious, like the cause of this is obvious.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a question of what it's going to take is tremendous will, but almost more importantly, tremendous stamina. I mean,
it also
there
takes,
were guys.
It also takes.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, it also takes, white men like you who have privilege and power to admit that white supremacy exists, to admit that systemic racism exists.
And I do feel like what's hard about that for people is you get defensive. Nobody likes to be called on their shit, especially when they feel like it's not really their shit.
Mm-hmm.
But what you realize is just stopping active persecution isn't enough to dismantle it. It has to be actively dismantled. Look, when I started on The Daily Show, right? Pretty much an all-white staff, all-white correspondents, mostly male. And people would call me out on various shit about it. And I would get defensive until I had to stop and think about it. There was an article written, there weren't enough women writers, and I was sexist. And I was like, sexist? I was raised by a single mother. My mother wore a t-shirt that said, a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. And I'm a man. I grew up in a house where I knew I wasn't needed. And I remember going back into the writer's room and saying, "You believe this shit? Kevin, Steve, Mike, Bob, Donald? Oh. Uh-oh.
Right.
Uh-oh." Now, we had a policy that all submissions, there'd be no names on it, right? Because we thought that's the way to not be sexist or racist or thing. But we still kept just hiring white dudes. Mm-hmm. White dudes from a certain background. And what we realized is the material, the river that we were getting the material from, the tributary, was also polluted by the same inertia. Mm-hmm. And you had to say to them, "Send me women, send me Black people." And all of a sudden, women got funny. Just kind of happened. But they've been funny all along. We just hadn't actively done enough to mine that. We had a writer of color. He and I got an argument. I did a bit about Herman Cain, where I adopted Herman Cain's accent, right? And to me, it was just his accent. But to that writer, it was a racist bit. And he called me out in a meeting with everybody around, and I got defensive and got mad. And it took me a long time to realize that the real issue was that we hired a person who is Black, and that because then they felt like they're carrying the weight of representation. Right. So they suddenly feel like I've got to be the speaker of and that puts a pressure on them so we think we're doing the right thing, but we're not doing it in the right way. Mm-hmm. And those were hard lessons for me. And they were humbling lessons. And I was defensive about them. And still didn't do it all right, because here's another one, socioeconomic. The television business, the radio business, it's run by rich people from Westchester and Long Island, right? Because the internships weren't paid. So interns would come in, and if you're going to hire somebody, where are you going to hire them from? The people you've met already, the interns.
Right.
The only people who could do internships had parents that were rich enough that could allow those kids to take a little time off of college, live in New York City, and do that job. So that whole tributary, so until you start paying interns, so the whole thing is seeded with inertia. And I don't consider myself malevolent, but my ignorance of that dynamic had real consequences.
But you was willing to learn.
I honestly think that most people are willing to learn. It's getting over the defensiveness, to realize you're not, being, called a racist or being a bit like, or maybe you are, or not giving so much of a shit that somebody might call you that.
Mm-hmm.
And be willing to say, like, we all have blind spots, and we still have blind spots.
Mm-hmm.
I know I do. But for us to dismantle the entrenched tributaries that continue to contribute to inequality of outcome of equity, it takes effort.
Yeah, it's all got to be intentional. Men got to be intentional when it comes to women. White people got to be intentional when it comes to black people. Straight people got to be intentional when it comes to gay people. We got to be intentional about it.
I think that's the perfect encapsulation of it. And that's why I say, yeah, you need the will, but you need the stamina. Because here's the other thing. The other side is just looking to discredit it. And know that any effort you make, look what they're doing. Man, the right is working overtime to make sure that they come out as the victims in this moment. They're tearing down monuments. What's next? George Washington? This isn't about you. It's not about your victimhood, but they're gonna work overtime to make sure that they're seen as the victims of this moment.
Right.
I got a couple more questions about the Daily Show. I saw you said you regret the Daily Show's involvement in the evisceration expectation. Can you explain that?
Evisceration.
Just like,
Evisceration. I'm sorry,
So-
evisceration.
Evisceration. Sometimes we'd have someone on like Jim Cramer or something like that, and the interview would get, there'd be blood in the water. It's what they would call good television. Good television. You never want to be a part of something called good television, because that generally means it's going off the rails.
Right. It's bringing the
and
ratings
I
in.
don't,
Right. So that blows up on the internet or whatever. I don't regret that moment, but what I regret is sometimes you get in the mindset of creating those moments that weren't authentic.
Oh, yes.
I don't like the idea that you might be consciously or subconsciously thinking about of outrage that's not real or authentic, of calibrating your reaction to what the situation really requires or is. And sometimes I would feel the pull to go further than that. And that's the thing that I regret. I don't regret those moments. I regret how much people just love those moments, and how you would sometimes feel like I've got to do it again.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's like you're people pleasing too much. Like, instead of going in there and doing what's natural, you want to do what you just saw work. So you want to do
That's
that
right.
again. Yeah, that happens. It
That's
happens
right.
in radio too.
Yep. And it's hard. You gotta, you kind of develop a moral barometer, an internal barometer that you try to keep yourself steady on, but you stray from it at times. And then the second thing I think that's important to do, and this is the hardest one, is forgive yourself.
Right.
Forgiving yourself is the key to getting over your own defensiveness and imperfections. Like, I had to learn to forgive myself for being wrong in situations and that hurting people and not wanting that. But we have to be able to start having the honest conversations, because again, it's like everything else. You don't fix something if you don't get to what's really the cancer at the bottom of it.
Right.
That's
For
right.
a period of time, people thought you were going to come back. Are you enjoying this behind the scenes more, though?
Love it. You know, look at this face. This face was young, man. I'm aging like a
Guacamole.
A president. You're aging like a president of America.
It's exactly. It's, you know, I really enjoy that part of it. I feel like I took that conversation as far as I could take it for my own thing. And that show deserved, and that audience deserved, somebody who was going to bring a different perspective and an enthusiasm and an insight that I can't bring. And I think we've seen that play out. You know, to Trevor, to me, diversity is still technology. You know what I mean? It's like an old person when they get a smartphone. It's new. And I can work it, but it's not. My kids, when they get on the phone, it just is. Trevor in this moment just is.
Yeah.
And I still have to work to get over. And I don't say that in the way of like white guilt. I don't mean it like that. I mean, I didn't see the whole field. And by not seeing the whole field well enough, I wasn't able to make the kinds of changes that I should have made at the speed and depth I should have made them.
Wow.
And I forgive myself for that. And I did the best I could.
Right.
Listen, we're always not going to get it right, you know, and that's what therapy is for. And that's what, you know, that's exactly what it's for. Listen, out of all your Daily Show alumni, Stephen Colbert, John Oliver, Samantha Bee, Michael Shea, who are you most proud of?
You know, proud is it's not like that. Because it almost suggests, you know, something paternal or something, you know. I'm impressed. Let me say that. You know, I hired them all for a reason, and they have done nothing but show me why. Their work on the show, from their work on the show to their work on all their other shows, they've done nothing but reinforce the idea that, boy, that was a good call having that person come in and contribute their brilliance to you for a little while. But yeah, there's a remarkable group of people, and they continue to do things that I just am wildly impressed with.
And how did you get time to write and direct the whole movie, but you had a deal with HBO and didn't produce nothing? We was all waiting for something on HBO.
So I tried to do, my idea was it was like a real-time animation, right? I wanted to do like a real-time news network, but animated, because I wanted to be behind the scenes, but I still wanted to do something. So I spent a long time working on that technology. And wouldn't you know, after working on it for a couple of years, that trying to take a form of humor that's topical with an art form that's very meticulous would be fucking hard. And we got close, and I felt like I got it to a point where it was usable, but not great. And I thought that because it wasn't great, and because the technology just wasn't there at the time, and even with HBO it wasn't there at the time, whatever we produced was animated and topical, but they couldn't run it on their networks for a week. So I was like, all right, well, so I spent a lot of time digging a hole to nowhere. And so that's why nothing got produced.
Got you.
All right, but we appreciate you.
But-
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah,
Appreciate
but
you
you
for
do have to
calling
tell
in.
us why the title is Irresistible. Why is that relevant to the plot of the film?
Because sometimes you can trap somebody with bait, with lure that you know would be irresistible to them. That when you see how somebody views the world through that prism of conflict and left versus right and rural versus city, you can lay out something for them, bait, that you know they're going to take.
We would take the bait every time.
Yep.
Holy shit, something just hit me. Did that goddamn pastry represent that in the movie?
Boom!
Oh, okay. All right.
As you're watching it.
Got you.
He's like, I'm getting fat, but I love it.
Got you. And even when no, I'm not going to
Don't give it away.
All right. Let people watch the movie,
Yeah. Wow. Brilliant fucking movie, Jon Stewart. Brilliant movie, man.
Well, thank you for calling in and checking in and, you know, stay up with us sometimes, you know?
Absolutely, guys. Thank you so much for the conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank
We
you, sir.
appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
All right. It's Jon Stewart. It's the Breakfast Club. Good morning.